either liquidation or firing. A certain person changes very little if we speak not about the private unit, but about the unit that was created by the government, and it was sponsored by the Russian top management. And here we are facing several scenarios. What we can see now, after the liquidation of Yevhen Prigozhin, there is a certain assessment of his popularity and the assessment of Wagner Group popularity. We can say that, first of all, there was the comment from the first person of the Russian Federation on what had happened on the 23rd of August. We heard the comment that Prigozhin was the talented business, but the person of complicated and difficult life. And the role of Wagner's group was praised for Russian Federation, and he promised not to forget about that. What we can see now, we can see the creation of spontaneous memorials to Prigozhin and Utkin, who was one of the most famous commanders in this group. And we can see the creation of some post and fan groups. We detect certain elements of so-called pilgrimage to the grave of Prigozhin, and he has never been honored as the hero of Russia. So he was supposed to be buried according to a certain ritual, but as we know, it never happened, or we were never shown that. So, and here we will see the issue of the legacy of Wagner Group. First of all, symbolic one. If there will be a great demand of this image, about the popularity of this image, probably it will be preserved. However, for me personally, the situation looks like we see the very competent neutralization of Wagner Group as the image itself. Because on one hand, the glorification of Wagner's group and Yevhen Prigozhin is not prohibited. On the other hand, however, there is no clear answer as for how Wagner's group is going to evolve. And I believe these are quite conscious actions targeting to stabilize the domestic political situation and its perception by, first of all, elites of the Russian Federation amid the future transition. Yet again, if we imagine the situation that Wagner Group as a cohesive concept is rejected, it doesn't mean that the combatants, especially such big-name commanders who were presented as the Russian Federation heroes within this unit, they will probably find their position in combat groups that are positioned as private mercenary companies, but they are not. Now we hear about Redut. This is the company that is called by the General Staff of Russia. The private company, however, it is not. Back in time, it was supported by Deripaska and Timchenko. And back in time, it comprised the General Staff veterans, the intelligence officers, and other law enforcement bodies. The media space also mentioned that one of the very famous commanders associated with the group, Wagner Group, Troshev, moved to Redut and recruits the representatives of Wagner Group. And it was happening when Prigozhin was still alive. It was indicated by one of the deputies of Prigozhin. His nickname was Lotus. His true name is Anton Yelizarov, and he is named among the possible people who can replace Prigozhin. But it can only happen in the case if Wagner brand will be preserved. We should not also forget that Wagner brand is not preserved. However, the conditional cohesion of this unit is preserved. For us, as the party, we can't care less if it's Wagner private group or Rachmaninov private group. This is still a project of special services, and it is funded by Russia. Doesn't matter if it's going to be Prigozhin's or Utkin's group. Well, they won't, because they're out of this game. It could be the group Pretibor or Lotus group, but for us it changes nothing. But something we mentioned after that so-called mutiny, Prigozhin's mutiny, from the concept of condemning everything that was done by Wagner Group, all the legacy left by this group. Quite apparently, the president and his administration decided to reject that all, and it all rooted from Putin's position that he voiced almost immediately after the Prigozhin's flight accident. If I get that right, the course of your thoughts, it begs an unexpected analogy about Schopenhauer, will and idea. So we can see there is the will of military heads of Russia. This is Putin, general staff, and intelligence officers. And the thing is how they implement this will. This could be private companies, Redut, Wagner, or so-called voluntary movements that were a disguise for Russian army from 2014. Do I get that right? And do we have enough facts to say that all these concepts, these ideological sketches for so-called Donbas volunteers who are not volunteers, who are not from Donbas? And can we argue this kind of blanket that the drive to power, they try to disguise that Putin and the heads of the Russian army? Yeah, that's true. And even before 2022, before Wagner Group became very much popular, and before this overwhelming inspection what this group was after 22, even before that, Ukrainian special services were very persuasive in explaining that this unit was created by general staff. When these people would go to Sudan or other spots of the African continents where Wagner Group had been for many years and still is there, that these people would get the passports for their coverage on the federal migration services, and these passports were got also by those infamous Petrov and Bashirov. And make no mistake that there are no strangers over there who would get documents there. Also, let's remember that after so-called mutiny, Even the Russian Federation president recognized that Russian Federation as the state has been sponsored from May 22, May 23, and it paid 86 billion rubles. So we actually have the confession of the first person who is behind multiplication and creation of these units, that these units were completely and fully created by Russian Federation as the state and were fully funded by Russian Federation. Let's also remember about the contracts for providing food. Let's not forget about the usage of military aviation by this group, the aviation of the Ministry of Defense, and it was recorded many times. And let's not forget that how could these people get to other continents without getting approval from the officials? Thank you. Let's move to Petrovsky, because his name is not as well known to the wide audience as Prigozhin. Who is this guy? Who's this Petrovsky who was detained in Finland? Or do you believe his extradition to Ukraine is realistic? And why can he be of interest to Ukrainian justice? He is extremely interesting to Ukrainian justice because he's the deputy of a famous Milchikov of sabotage assault dragon group Rusich. He was the acting head that is proved in publics close to Milchikov and to Russian special services. He would be very interesting to us because this person is guilty of military and war crimes. This person could tell so much how Alexei Milchikov could stay out of access to justice he deserved. And this person could, of course, speak about this backstage of this pseudo volunteer unions and battalions we have just mentioned. Because yet again, if we look at what or who this person is, we heard from the Finns and from media who covered the events around the Petrovsky detention in Finland. He used the documents to the name of Voslav Torden. It was the same name mentioned by Union of Donbas Volunteers as the representative of Union Donbas Volunteers in St. Petersburg. This is something I recorded for myself because it was quite an unnatural name, even for the representatives of Union of Donbas Volunteers, that comprises many, many freaks. And this person, as the founders of Ested LLC in the Russian Federation, and among the founders, there were Petrovsky and Torden Voislav Igorovich with patronymic. And we can see here that coincision in this case of the patronymic is not an accident, it's not a coincidence. And we could see that it from the media that covers his detention in Finland. Petrovsky is in fact quite an interesting person. Back in 2016, he was extradited from Norway as someone who poses a great threat to national security of this country. And the question how he got there. He had the residence permit because his mother had emigrated to this country a long time ago. If I'm not mistaken, it was back in 1990s. And the question here is that how this person gets to various countries, and countries that now say that the war, the Russia's war against Ukraine is illegal, and so how could this person get to this country because he is on sanction lists? So it raises many, many questions as for how thoroughly the information is assessed, provided by the Russian Federation. Do you believe that his detention could be a part of Russian Federation's plan if they want to get rid of sabotage assault dragon group Rusich, which is quite weird even for the Russian army unit, considering the neo-Nazi background and description of war crimes that they described on the social media that they allegedly committed. I wouldn't accept this concept. I do not exclude any, even most complex staging Russian Federation could throw, especially amid transit times, and especially around the situation we can say about Prigozhin and Wagner Group, because there are so many questions without answers, or answers that each listener, each viewer can pick, depending on what assessment of the situation or scenarios they tend and they lean to. In this case, I don't think that would be too complicated, too complex plan. And to liquidate the threat from Rusich Group, it would be much easier to start with Milchikov and make it look as if it was combat wound, something fatal happened to him, to make it look like it was in combat. There were so many words were said about Melchikov that he was wounded and killed in different geographical positions, and both Melchikov and Petrovsky were associated with Wagner Group in different years. So there were many opportunities. However, there is one component that prevents me from excluding this scenario completely, and this component is discreditation of security measures taken by our allies on examining and verification of the documents submitted by Russian Federation nationals trying to get to the European Union and trying to evade the restrictions imposed against them. As the demonstration of the loopholes in security system in the EU, that could be, but the reputational losses in this case for a foreign ministry of the Russian Federation are too big. We saw the open scandal provoked by Rusich Group when this news became public. They said that when this news came out, Petrovsky was out of grid for 36 hours, and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation was doing nothing, and that's a really wrong position. Well, I cannot exclude this scenario, but I'm quite skeptical about that. Thank you for this interesting conversation, Maria, for a very deep analysis. I hope we will have many topics and reasons to talk about these private mercenary groups, some members of Russian units that use groups to capture power. Thank you very much. Thank you. It was Maria Kucherenko, the analyst of Come Back Alive Foundation. Our next briefing takes place at noon, and it will be focused on the academic year preparation in the region.